So this afternoon, I would like to introduce Colonel John Blashford-Snell. Now, he is one of the world's most renowned and highly respected explorers. John has mounted numerous expeditions over the past 50 years, all over the world, concentrating on scientific research and community aid. Hello, John. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Good afternoon.
Very good to see you. So, John, you were brought up in Herefordshire and Jersey, where you went to school and then attended Sandhurst before joining the Army in the Royal Engineers. What did you love about the Army most, would you say?
Undoubtedly, travel and adventure, I think, are the things that appeal to me because my parents had been great travellers. They'd started off their married life in New Zealand, where my father was ordained and joined the Territorial Army. And they lived in a little homemade vicarage in the middle of nowhere. They rode everywhere on horseback. Their parishioners, many of them were Maoris. They lived and hunted with the Maoris. And they came back to England in the 1930s, where I was eventually born. And they had all these stories of travel and adventure in the far corners of what we call the Empire.
Lovely.
And that's what really attracted me to the Army, because I could see by being a soldier, I was going to be able to travel and hopefully have quite an adventurous time.
Yes, I'm sure you did as well.
Well, by joining the Royal Engineers, which I was very lucky to get into because I wasn't particularly good at my mathematics, I, in fact, found myself in an organization that specialized in conquering obstacles, whether they were mountains or swamps or deserts or oceans or whatever. And they were looking for sort of maniacs like me who were prepared to go. In fact, they always say that sappers are mad, married, or Methodist. I wasn't a Methodist, and I did get married fairly young, but we were probably all mad. And that was the tradition of the Corps, as we were known. And it was to go all over the world, building roads or finding ways through hideous bits of terrain, and also being fighting soldiers. Yeah. So it suited me down to the ground.
How brilliant. So obviously from a young age, you had a sense of adventure, I suppose, and an appetite for exploration, I suppose, to do with your parents being in New Zealand and everything.
Yes, I did. Well, I was very lucky. And my first, of course, I was brought up in Jersey, and being a small island, one has to sort of get away from it, and you become an explorer. Yeah. But the island was fantastic for diving, and I learned to dive underwater there. My heroes in early life were various great divers like, what was his name? Peter Truesdale, sorry, Truesdale, I forgot his name. And the island was surrounded by very large fish and some rather tricky Congo eels, which we went trying to catch. Oh, and the aqualung had just come out, so we bought an aqualung, we formed a little club, and we went diving. And that really was a great start to life. And we also climbed cliffs, and we explored all the German tunnels from the German occupation during World War II. So it was a great adventurous start as a youngster, being brought up at Victoria College in Jersey.
Yes, that's what all the children of today need to be doing more of.
Yes.
Get off their iPads and iPhones and whatever. So, John, you founded the Scientific Exploration Society in 1969. Can you tell me a little bit about this?
Well, of course, before that, I'd been in Cyprus with the sappers, and I'd also managed to take a quick trip out to the Far East to see a rather nice girlfriend of mine who became my fiancée and to whom I'm still married. And once I got to Cyprus, of course, the army let me go on expeditions that were really military exercises. And we spent some time clearing mines in Libya from World War II. And I was also given command of an underwater section. These were sort of sapper frogmen, and we were doing beach surveys, checking wrecks, looking for nasty things that people put on the bottoms of our boats, and so on. So again, a very adventurous start. And then when I got back to England, after one or two quick postings with the Junior Leaders Regiment, I was posted to Sandhurst. And on arrival, the general, who was a wonderful character, who was a Canadian actually, and very adventurous man, had me into his office and he said, "I want you to be the adventure training officer." And I didn't quite. And he said, "Do you know what that means?" And I said, "I'm not sure, General." And he said, "Well, it's quite simple. I want you to get as many of these cadets overseas for the benefit of their character and the least possible detriment to the Empire." So my job was to organize extramural activities in various countries all over the world for the officer cadets who wanted to go on them, and they were, of course, very eager. And we undertook scientific studies. We went looking for bugs and beetles and snakes and creepy crawlers. We went building schools and clinics. We went helping people. And all this was done in the long vacations that Sandhurst enjoyed in those days. And of course, several of the expeditions I led myself. So we built up this tradition of adventure training in the British Army, which of course is now a well-established thing. And then on one of the expeditions, we went to Ethiopia, where fortunately my godfather had helped to look after Emperor Haile Selassie, who had been exiled to Britain during World War II after the Italians invaded his country.
Yeah.
And so my godfather was invited back to Ethiopia many times after the war and became quite friendly with the emperor. And when my godfather heard that I would like to take some cadets on an expedition to Africa, he said, "Why not go to Ethiopia? I will write to the emperor about you." He did.
Amazing.
The emperor applied and said, "Yes, they must come to my country and we'll find some good tasks for them." So off we went with a party of cadets.
Yeah.
I took my wife and a friend of hers as well.
Brilliant.
And we went collecting specimens for the Natural History Museum. So it was really hunting. And although I don't hunt now, in those days it was a great adventure. Not that I knew very much about hunting big animals, but off we went to Ethiopia. And there were several other expeditions from Sandhurst to Ethiopia as a result of this. And then at the end of the last one,
yes,
the emperor took me aside at the end of the audience, and he said in perfect English, "I do hope you will return to my country." And I said, "Of course, sir, we'd love to. What would you like us to do?" And he said, "I'd like you to explore my Blue Nile."
Oh, wow.
And that was rather like asking an average hill walker to climb Everest. And I'd seen the river looking down into this mile-deep gorge, and I realized it was pretty formidable, and nobody had ever navigated it or mapped it. It was said to be full of aggressive crocodile and hippos and lots of bandits who didn't like paying income tax.
Yeah.
Were hiding out in the bottom. And so we got the backing of the army and the Daily Telegraph and Anglia Television, and we formed a 60-strong expedition of soldiers and scientists to go out and navigate this 500 miles of river between the mountains of Ethiopia and the Sudan border. The gorge is a mile deep. It was full of rapids and a very tricky piece of navigation. We also had a few problems with the bandits, but luckily, being soldiers, we were allowed to be armed, so we were able to fight our way out of that. But after the expedition was over, and it got a huge amount of publicity, the emperor was delighted, everyone was pleased, and the general at Santa said, you know, you've really got to form yourselves into some sort of organization at the moment, or just a group of idiots who go off and do these things. You should form an organization. And that's what started the Scientific Exploration Society, bringing together soldiers and servicemen to undertake really worthwhile expeditions of some value to mankind.
How brilliant. That's a wonderful, wonderful story, actually, as to how it all came about. Now, something I was dying to ask you is, so the invention of whitewater rafting, how did that come about?
By accident. Well, during the Blue Nile, of course, we had to navigate these rapids, and no one had gone down rapids in boats before and survived. And I met up with a Swedish canoeist who tried to do it and been badly smashed up in the gorges. And I said, what do you think we could do to overcome these rapids? And he said, well, I think you should try some sort of rubber boat that would bounce off the rocks.
Yeah.
So I went to see the Avon company in South Wales, and I said, you make these yachting tenders. Do you think some of your rubber boats would survive the worst river in the world? And they were a bit worried about this, but I said, well, if we can have a few of them, we'll take them up to a weir in mid-Wales at Llangollen, and we'll test them. And we did. And we found these boats were quite remarkable. They would shoot over the weir and bounce into rocks, and they were strong enough not to get punctured. But to be really sure, we put extra big valves in the sides, and through that we inserted football bladders and blew those up. So in fact, you've got sort of tubes within tubes.
So double.
And what we produced was a virtually unsinkable rubber boat. And these were the boats that we used on the Blue Nile or on the upper reaches. And that was what started whitewater rafting. And of course, the Avon company then began to mass produce them. and it took off all around the world as whitewater rafting.
Hope you got commission on that.
No, we didn't. We got a very good deal there. They said, we'll always help you with boats when you need them. And they always have done.
Okay, fair enough. Good, quite a good deal then. So you oversaw the first north-south vehicular journey from Alaska to Cape Horn in 1979. Do you have any particular memories that really stick in your mind from that?
What, from Alaska to Cape Horn?
Yes.
Well,
are there any that really stand out?
Yes, I mean the crossing of the Darian Gap. I was working at the Ministry of Defence at the time, and I was asked to go and advise a group of businessmen who had Anglo-Hispanic relations about the crossing of this 250 miles of swamp and jungle and mountains and creepy crawlers and bandits again.
Yeah.
I said, well, you must do a reconnaissance before you try to do it, because the rest of the route from Alaska to Cape Horn is on highways. But it's this 250 miles in the middle, for which the various countries of South America are trying to get money to build a road. And so they said, well, who's going to do the reconnaissance? I said, well, by good fortune, I happen to have an Irish friend who recently overtook a police car on the wrong side of the road at 70 miles an hour in Whitehall, and he's quite keen to go overseas at the moment.
I'm sure.
So I got hold of Brendan and gave him 100 quid, and he went off to the Darian Gap and got hold of some Indians, and he managed to march through this terrible piece of terrain, and he staggered back at the end, looking very unwell.
Yeah.
And he said, I found a way, I think you can do it, but don't ask me to come with you. and so we then formed up this expedition, and the army once again came in and backed it. My boss was the chief royal engineer, thought this was a splendid idea. He'd been in the SAS and the war, and he thought this sort of a way to get on was just how we should excite soldiers and do some good engineering in the field. And so we wanted a vehicle to go through. The idea was that we would take the vehicle from Alaska to Cape Horn and show that the road was possible, and therefore, hopefully, the American government would provide billions of dollars to build the road. And Rover had just produced the Range Rover, and they wanted to test it out. And so they very kindly loaned us 2 brand new Range Rovers, which the RAF flew to Alaska. We had a group of soldiers from the 17th, 21st Lancers, and they drove the vehicles down to Panama. And there I had got a team of Royal Engineers and scientists and various specialists to actually get through the gap. The gap was 250 miles. No one had ever completely got through the gap and the swamp at the other end. And we tried to do it in the dry season. But unfortunately, when we got there, the dry season didn't exist. It had started raining early.
Oh, no.
And so we were up to our axles in mud in no time. The back axles began to break. I think we broke 9 of them, and we had to bring in spares. We bought a beaten up old Land Rover to send it ahead with the engineers, and we did eventually get the Land Rover right through. And by that time, the Range Rovers were repaired, and they roared after us.
Yeah.
And they got through too. So in 100 days, we crossed the Darian Gap, and we got through this tremendous swamp at the far end, which was the bit that nobody had done, and into Colombia. And then the soldiers who'd come with it originally drove it down to Cape Horn. And that completed the 17,000-mile journey, which, of course, has now become one of the great historic expeditions of our time.
Yes. How amazing, amazing. And John, you were expedition leader of Operation Drake, the round the world voyage for young explorers. Now, this is a 2-year expedition. Can you tell us a bit about what life was like on board?
Well, of course, it wasn't all on board. It was Drake was brought about after we'd done another huge expedition in the Congo. And I should mention that during this expedition on the Congo, which was to navigate the whole length of the Congo, 2,700 miles, while looking into a blinding disease that was affecting 20 million people, again, there was a film on the BBC, there was a lot of publicity. And with that expedition, we had some of the equerries of the Prince of Wales. And they told him all about the expedition and the fact that we'd taken some young people with us, 2 or 3 of them, 1 from America, 2 from Jersey. And then on return, they had gone around lecturing to schools and colleges and sort of inspired them with the Elizabethan spirit of adventure. And the Prince of Wales said, "You can't stop now, you must do it again, you must make it bigger. Can't you design an expedition for young people to create young leaders?" So we scratched our head and went away, and we decided that if we could buy a boat, we would take it round the world, and we would open it to anyone who was 17 to 25, and as the Prince said, fit, compatible, speak English and swim, and they would all have an opportunity to spend 3 months on this circumnavigation. Well, the Prince went on television, and as a result of that, 57,000 people applied.
Wow, huge.
So we then had to select them, and we set up selection centers where people were put through some pretty arduous tests. And the one that I always remember was when they had to handle a wild animal.
Right.
And on a damp February night in Kent, they were marched into an attic of a barn and told somewhere in here there's a wild animal. And then underneath some blankets, they found a 12-foot python.
Oh my goodness.
They had to pick it up, weigh it, and measure it. And they were given a bathroom scales and a measuring tape and a torch. And both of these youngsters jumped back in horror at this great snake. And he was coming out with his tongue flickering in the light.
That's awful.
But the girl amongst them, who was a very tough police cadet, said, "I can handle snakes."
Yeah.
And she tried to get the snake onto the bathroom scales. Well, it didn't work because the head went one way and the tail went the other. And in the end, she wrapped that snake round herself and stood on the bathroom scales and took A from B, and that was how they weighed the snake. Well, of course, the newspapers had an absolute ball. Anyway, it was tests like that. We did some more with gorillas. We did some with cows, some with bullocks and all sorts of things. We even had sheep covered in Vaseline, and which we had to try and catch, and so on. But we selected 400 of these young men and women from many countries, not just Britain, and they were to go round the world with our ship that we've now managed to charter, called the Eye of the Wind, which was a beautiful brigantine, and they would spend 3 months, sometime on land, sometime on the ship. And they all became very good sailors and also pretty good explorers on the land. And this went on for 2 years. And we went to South America and then over to Australia, New Zealand, and off to Africa, Indonesia, and then back to the Mediterranean. On the last leg, we even had an airship with us from the Goodyear company, provided the Europa, and we had that and the old brigantine, and we did our final expedition with that in the Mediterranean, looking for pollution levels off Italy. We also had a Beaver aircraft that the Army provided, which was a wonderful asset. And this was a huge success. And the great thing was, as far as the Prince of Wales was concerned, these young people became leaders. They went to their own communities, they helped the older people, they helped build up clinics, they helped in schools, and we'd achieved exactly what he wanted. So he said, you can't stop now.
No.
Can you not make it bigger? So Operation Raleigh was born. And this time the government, Margaret Thatcher, put her whole weight behind it. And we got a 2,000-ton research vessel. We also got a marvelous brigantine called the Zebu, and other ships joined as well. And we began recruiting once more. This time, the publicity went out just as widely. The Prince made more television appearances, and we had thousands and thousands of applicants, and we selected 4,000 from all these numbers. Again, from all over the world. Again, it was a circumnavigation with scientific and community tasks on the land, sometime on the sea, lots of diving, lots of all the adventure things that people dreamed about. And of course, you had to fund it. And that was always a battle because it was going to cost £20 million. But most of the money was raised by young people, each raising a set target. And they were jolly good at it. Each one had to raise about £2,500. And it still goes on today as called Raleigh International now. I still help them when I can, and it's still doing a great job, although they don't have the ships now. It's mostly land-based. The ships are pretty expensive to run, but nevertheless, it's been a success.
What an amazing thing. Absolutely fantastic. And what... So you've done an enormous number of expeditions over the years. Which ones remain most prominent in your mind for either being extraordinary or incredibly taxing? What sticks in your mind the most?
Well, the Blue Nile was probably the most difficult. Because we had to fight battles not only with crocodiles and the terrain, but also with bandits. And that was the most taxing. Then the Congo River was politically the most difficult because we were operating in a country riddled with problems. President Mobutu was holding on slightly to the country because there were even Chinese troops occupying parts of it. And there were lots of rebels and so on. So that was a very difficult one. And the river itself was enormous. But politically, that was the most difficult. The Darian Gap was physically the most difficult because getting through that jungle was quite formidable. But I think the most rewarding, without a doubt, was Operation Drake and Operation Raleigh, because what it did to the lives of these young people. And today, I get letters all the time from, they're not so young now, But many of those young people who came with us on those expeditions really did achieve something in life.
Yes.
I remember once talking to a group in Alaska who'd just done a very exciting kayak trip. And I said to them, now you've done all that, you can reach for the stars. And some of them did. And one of them was Tim Peake, who just produced his book. Another girl from one of the expeditions, who was a really sporty, tough girl, went on to become a dame and the British ambassador in Beijing. Another lady became a dame. She was Claire Berginger, who started all the Band-Aid schemes to save people in Africa. And there were others too. I think one of them is now a BBC announcer and so on. So I've seen all these young people that passed through our hands. And one young man, of course, who didn't come on Draco Raleigh, but one of the first young men that came to see me with the Scientific Exploration Society was a young soldier who'd come back from Oman. And he came in and he said, sir, I want to go on an expedition. And his name was Ranulph Fiennes.
Oh.
And he hasn't stopped doing it ever since.
No.
So I look back on the time with Raleigh and Drake and running all those programs for what it did for young people and how it created this enormous number of worthwhile young leaders who went out to help other people.
Amazing. You've shaped so many people's lives. You must feel very proud of that. It's amazing. Now, can you tell me a bit about charity and some of the charities you support?
Well, the Scientific Exploration Society, of course, is a charity.
Yes.
And it's gone on and still goes on strongly now. I'm glad to say it's now chaired by a young man who came through our hands in the early days, Neil Lawton, who himself is one of Britain's leading adventurers and has climbed almost every mountain in the world that's worth climbing, including a couple of times up Everest.
Yeah.
And that charity is particularly keen on encouraging young people, and we have an award scheme every year that issues out grants of money, some of them quite reasonable grants, £8,000 at a time, to help youngsters, or not necessarily youngsters, they can be older, but people who want to go and do something worthwhile in the world, whether it be to do with aiding a community or scientific work or whatever. And every year we have a big award ceremony, and we present these grants to people who seek them from all over the world. It's not just Britain, but quite a lot of the applicants are, of course, British. So that is my main charity. But I have worked with others. A lot of my work, too, is done with inner city youngsters. I always say that half my life is spent in the green jungle and half in the concrete one. And the concrete ones in places like Liverpool and Brixton and places like that are where young people need help. Yes. And in Brixton, I've got a group of marvelous young people. I have to be careful how you address them these days, but coloured young people.
Yes.
A lot of them are from the West Indies, but they've always found difficulty with jobs and so on. And so I've got a marvelous former Jamaican lady who runs the charity, and it's called the Moorlands Community Development Project. And that does tremendous work with the young people like that who need help in finding a way in life.
Yes.
Same time, I've been involved with sailing opportunities through the Trinity Sailing Trust, and also a very large scheme in Liverpool, again with underprivileged youngsters. We set up a centre called The Door, which takes people from all backgrounds and finds them a new way in life. A lot of them come in when they're homeless or single parent or unemployed or pregnant or on drugs or whatever it is.
Yes.
And we've had 40,000 young people through The Door. And we did this by buying a block of council offices in Liverpool, right in the middle of the city. And we refurbished them and rebuilt them. It was quite a struggle raising the money to do that. And that has become known as The Door. and the Door is doing tremendous work with the young people of Merseyside.
Yes, fantastic. That's really good.
Other than that, of course, I always remember my debt to the army, so I do what I can to help the Not Forgotten organisation and the Army Benevolent Fund and the British Legion.
Yes.
And of course, particularly with the veterans coming back from places like Afghanistan and the Gulf, they always need help.
No, of course they do. Absolutely. And John, I hear you are writing a book. Can you tell us a bit about the book?
Well, I've written, this will be the 16th book. I've written a number of them, partly to aid the Scientific Exploration Society. The last one I wrote was an autobiography called Something Lost Behind the Ranges, which is a quote from Kipling. And that one really covered the expeditions up until about 1994. I revised it recently, but there's a huge gap since 1994 to fill in. So I'm now doing a new book, like really an anthology, which will be a whole collection of stories. It will talk, of course, about things like the Blue Nile expedition, but it will bring in some of the other ventures that I've taken since the days when I left the army. And I retired from the army in 1991. And since then, I've been taking the Wrinklies on expeditions. That's the over 25s. They have undertaken tremendous challenges. Well, those have not really been recorded. I mean, one of the ones that became quite well known was when we took a grand piano to a tribe on the Amazon, and that was made into a BBC film. And in fact, over 40 of the films we've made in the last 20 years are now on YouTube. And there's a thing called the JBS channel. And a lot of them are homemade movies, but some were made by proper production companies, so they're rather higher standard, and there for people to see. And so that's been a lot of my work in recent years. And we're trying to put all that, I'm trying to put all those stories together in a new anthology, which I hope I'll be able to write in the next year.
Fantastic. Well, when you've launched it, we would love to promote it to our members for you.
Thank you very much.
On Grapevine, and members must as well sign up to your YouTube channel too, which I will note down when I publish this interview for people to see. So, John, you're still obviously leading expeditions now. What's in the diary once COVID gets out of the way?
Well, we should have been in Bolivia the end of last year, but that's been postponed, and we're going to look for an extraordinary type of alligator in Bolivian Amazonas. We're hoping we might get away in November, December this year, COVID permitting. Yeah. That one's in the diary. I've got a full team all itching to get there. And also, of course, we've got a team for Mongolia. And that was due to take place in June, July. We've now slipped it into later in July. And I hope we're going to be able to carry it out. If not, we'll have to postpone it further. But we've got a team of nearly 30 people, which are on horseback, who are carrying out medical work, archaeology, biology, botany, zoology, in the eastern part of east of Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. And whenever you mention horses, of course, you are swamped with women who want to come with you.
I'm sure.
Women ride horses, men don't these days.
Yeah.
We've got about 50-50 in our team.
Brilliant. I bet particularly now after all these lockdowns, everyone is absolutely desperate to get out of their houses.
After that, we shall probably go back to elephants in Nepal. I've done a lot of work with elephants and tiger in West Nepal. But of course, Nepal, like everywhere else, is cut off at the moment.
Yes.
And we're actually sending out quite a lot of support to help the people there, because we want to keep these wildlife reserves going, and without money they can't.
No.
So we've been raising a few pennies to try and do that, and to help the people who are keeping the animals alive.
Yeah, very good. And talking about sort of animals and wildlife, have you had any particularly close encounters where you thought?
Oh yes, well, one or two, but
tell us some.
I can tell you it's much more frightening facing a man with a gun than it is facing an animal. But the animals, yes, I think the worst attack I ever had was a vampire bat. And that was in Panama when I was on the San Blas Islands, just coming back from finding the lost colony of Scotland in the Darian Gap again. And I was camping in an Indian village, and I made a mistake of not putting on a mosquito net at night.
Right.
And I was in this Indian's hut, and in the middle of the night I felt a prick on my toe, and I paid no attention. I thought it was just a mosquito or something. But then I woke up and went off to spend a penny, and as I was coming back up the ladder into the hut, I noticed that the steps were running in blood. And then I looked at my foot, and my foot was squirting blood out of one toe. So luckily the doctor was sleeping in the hut as well. So I called him and I said, "What on earth have I done?" And he looked at it and he said, "My God, have you got leukemia in your family?" I said, "No, I don't think so." He said, "Well, you must have trodden on something." I said, "No, I haven't." Anyway, he cleaned me up and looked around, and he said, "Something's bitten you," but he said, "It's a tiny little bite. I can't see how so much blood is coming out of such a small bite." And then he said, he talked to one or two of the Indians, and he said, "Was there a bat in your room?" And I said, "Yes, there was a few bats flying around."
Yeah.
He said, "I think you've been bitten by a vampire bat." And of course, the vampires land beside you. They don't fly onto your neck as they show in film. They land beside the bed and they walk towards the piece of your body that's farthest away from movement, which is often your feet. And then they nip you and they inject you with anticoagulant and anesthetic. So you don't feel much of a bite. And of course, once the blood starts to flow, it pours out. And when the bat's had its drink and flies away to digest you, the blood goes on flowing.
Keeps coming.
And the only problem is that something like 4% of bats carry rabies. So the next day when I got back into Panama City, I went up to the Gorgas Hospital and told them, they said vampire bats. Yeah, we get them all the time. So they started me on the injections, and I had to have 32 injections in the wall of my stomach over a period of 32 days.
In case it was rabies.
I can tell you it's not something I'd recommend, because when the needle gets around to where the last one went in, it's very, very painful. But now, of course, they've developed much better vaccines, and you just get a couple of shots in the bottom, and that's all right.
Yeah.
But in the old days, the ones in the stomach were pretty unpleasant.
Yes,
I reckon I'm now proof against rabies.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure. That is brilliant. And any other funny, what about, to finish off, do you have a funny story? What's the funniest story you think you? Yes,
when we were on the Congo River expedition, one of the animals we were trying to find for the zoologists was called a bonobo, and it's a type of a small chimpanzee. And they were said to be in a very dense area of jungle, miles from anywhere. And so we sent off a team of Royal Marines, who were very tough chaps indeed, and a zoologist and a rubber boat, and off they went looking for the bonobo. And eventually the messages began coming back by radio, got fainter and fainter and fainter. And they were saying, "There've been so many miles today, no bonobos. So many miles today, no bonobos." Well, I was back on the river where we had a base, and a lady, two ladies came up to see me, and they started speaking in Lingala, which I couldn't speak. And the only word in English they knew was Buckingham Palace. Eventually, through an interpreter, I found out that they had actually been to Buckingham Palace. because one of them was a lady in waiting to Madame Mobutu.
Oh.
And she said, would you come to dinner with us? So it was very nice. So 2 or 3 of us went along to dinner at her house that evening. And I always remember she had this old Belgian colonial bungalow that had been abandoned. And she'd got an enormous jukebox in there which played ear-shattering sounds. And we sat down to dinner. And I can't remember what particular animal we ate, but it was a bit, it was all right, it was tasty.
Tough.
And while dinner was going on, I felt a hand on my leg. And I looked across at the other lady who was opposite me, and she was wearing a dress with prints of President Mobutu worn upside down. And I thought, how on earth is this lady doing it? She's got her hand on my knee, but her hands are on the table. And eventually, when the hand began to go up inside my trouser leg, I thought, this has gone far enough. So I reached under the table and grabbed the hand and pulled it out. And out came a baby chimpanzee. And I said to my hostess, oh, you found, what was my funny? She said, you found Sophie. I said, Sophie? I said, it's a baby chimpanzee. No. She said, he's not a baby chimpanzee. It's an old chimpanzee. And I realized that what I'd found was the only bonobo that we ever discovered living under the table in this lady's dining room on the river in Zaire.
Amazing.
So,
That's a brilliant story. Thank you very much for recalling that. John, thank you so much for your time today. It's absolutely fascinating, and I think everyone will love hearing everything that.
Well, you can edit that a bit now and get down to.
Well, I'm not very good at editing. I'll see how I get on. But anyway, thank you very, very much, and it was really great to hear.
All right, thanks, Ben. All the best to you.